Thank you, Nari. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I guess this is our first of many, many Zooms and hopefully soon live town halls in my second term as your representative. The first 2 years were extraordinary and memorable and productive, I can say in my life, in my career, there has been no greater honor that I have had than the chance to represent all of you and so many others in our district in the Congress. And I'm very, very humbled and happy to have this chance to do it with you and for you on your behalf for the next 2 years. And I want to use this session mostly just to get your questions and concerns and suggestions for these really critical few months that we have after I'm sworn in January for the second term. This was, of course, a very close election in our district and in many House races around the country, and of course, a very highly contested presidential election. And I take a couple of things away from this experience. First of all, I think our democratic system has been tested these last 4 years in almost unprecedented ways, and I think our system passed the test. We still have a long way to go, and there are many controversies yet to be settled, many obstacles still to be overcome. But the American people voted in unbelievably high numbers. We had close to 80% turnout in our district. In virtually every part of the United States, turnout was at historic highs. That's a very, very good thing. Despite some very ridiculous and preposterous attacks on the integrity and outcome of this election, the outcome is absolutely clear. We have this decentralized, unique in the world, decentralized election system in the United States that relies on the goodwill, hard work, and integrity of local elected officials of both parties across our many states and counties. And invariably, those people stepped up and did the right thing, whether they were Republicans or Democrats. They followed the law, they respected the will of the voters. And on January 20th, we'll have a new president, we'll have a new Congress on January 3rd or 4th or 5th, whenever we're sworn in. And that's something that we should take a lot of pride in and confidence from. And I'm sure there'll be more questions about some of those issues from many of you. I also think, again, it was very, very close in this district and a lot of congressional races. And I think the message I take from the voters is that they want us to stand up clearly and firmly for American principles, even when it means taking political risks, even when it means flying into political headwinds. But they also want us to be pragmatic and to reach across the aisle to solve America's problems. So uncompromising when it comes to principles, but willing to compromise and be flexible and to build coalitions involving people on all sides when it comes to solving our problems. And that is the challenge that we face right now in this last month or so of the current Congress, and that we will face with the new president starting in January. The remaining work of this Congress, well, first of all, we've got to fund the government for the coming year. So we are working right now on a continuing resolution and hopefully something a bit more than that to be able to keep all of our agencies up and running. As you recall, when I was sworn in the very first time, when I was first elected, it was in the middle of a government shutdown brought on by the president's refusal to sign a budget that Republicans and Democrats had agreed to. I don't think that's going to happen this time. I think we're going to get this job done. And of course, we'll be here in Washington until that happens. And the second urgent piece of business is it's more relief funding to help us deal with the coronavirus, extending some of the benefits and programs that were created by the CARES Act, many of which begin to expire at the end of the year, and hopefully building on those so that our states, our governors have the resources that they need to make the public health choices that are necessary to protect us without harming small businesses, without leading to more economic dislocation for our citizens. And here I'm a little bit more pessimistic, I'm afraid, and I'm sure we'll have opportunity to talk about the details. I was among the Democrats who felt that our leadership on the Democratic side should have seized the opportunity before the election to reach a deal with President Trump, even if it was not going to be perfect, just to get us through the winter. But with the expectation that we would be able to do more once President Biden was sworn in. And now we're in a situation where President Trump is no longer governing the country or attempting to. He seems to have no interest in anything other than whining about the election. And Senator McConnell, who runs the Senate, has never been all that interested in, as you all know, anything remotely generous to provide relief to the people of this country. And so I think our ability right now, our leverage to get something reasonable is smaller than it was back in late October. I'm still going to do my very best to press leaders on both sides to do as much as can be done, and even if it's modest, we'll take another crack at it in late January, early February. But I'm concerned about December and January right now, and I want us to do whatever is politically possible to ease the burden that our small businesses in particular are going to face in this difficult time. So those are the immediate priorities. I know you guys will have questions about post-January, but I would, I think, want to close right now and invite you all to start posing those questions so that I can use as much of the time that we have available to be as responsive as I possibly can. So, Dorit, why don't you get us started, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Before we begin with the live questioning, we're going to go through a few frequently asked questions that were submitted beforehand. As Tom said, if you guys have questions, now is a great time to ask them through the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Just remember to please include your name and the town you are from. And after we get through these frequently asked questions, we will go into that portion. All right, Tom, your first pre-submitted question. What are some of your legislative and district priorities in the next Congress?
So I'll start where I left off. The most important is to get a coronavirus relief package done. And within that, my top priorities are, as many of you know, getting assistance for our state, county, and local governments, which have suffered revenue loss because of the economic shutdowns, while at the same time being our frontline agencies to help deal with the crisis. I want to make sure that all of the 75 small towns in our district are made whole at the end of this, and that our state also has the resources it needs. Not to do anything non-coronavirus related, but just to make sure that the current levels of service are maintained despite the loss of revenue due to the coronavirus. So that's number one. I want to make sure that we extend the PPP, the small business lending program, and I would like within that to do something more targeted and more generous for those parts of our small business economy that are hardest hit right now. Our restaurants, our bars, our entertainment venues, gyms, small businesses that rely on people gathering indoors, so that our governor and the governors of other states have the economic flexibility they need to make decisions to protect our public health. If they feel like, for example, we want to focus on opening schools while shutting down bars and restaurants, I want to make sure that we can do that without causing any of those bars and restaurants to go out of business. And that's where Congress has this responsibility to provide resources. So that's on COVID relief. We can go into more detail on that if you like. Then we get to recovery and stimulus. And I try not to use the word stimulus to describe the relief legislation, because the relief legislation is just about keeping things going at current levels, keeping small businesses alive. The best stimulus bill, in my view, would be an infrastructure bill for the country and certainly for New Jersey. We need it anyway. We have so many bridges and roads and tunnels and airports and ports that need to be fixed and modernized. But it's also a fantastic way of putting people to work, creating new jobs at a moment when we are going to need to pump new vitality into our economy after this terrible year that we have just been through. We passed a pretty strong infrastructure bill in the House last year, which did all of those things while also making a down payment on transitioning our transportation economy to clean energy, refurbishing, modernizing, expanding our national electricity grid, among other things. And that, I think, is going to, for me, like the very first major piece of legislation in terms of our economy that we need to get to after the initial COVID relief would be infrastructure. We will almost certainly, and this is important to me, pass H.R. 1 again. This was the first bill that we introduced in the last Congress. I think it should be again this Congress, with campaign finance reform, getting dark money out of our politics, fixing our elections, ending partisan gerrymandering, allowing everybody in this country to vote by mail, as we did. 95% of the ballots, by the way, in this election nationally were cast on paper, a record in modern times, and one reason we can have confidence in the integrity of the election. I'd like to make sure that we can continue to do that, as well as legislation to deal with potential future abuses of presidential power. I have some confidence that President Biden is not going to do things like firing inspectors general willy-nilly and stealing money that Congress appropriates for one purpose to fund his pet projects that are not agreed to by Congress, and using the Justice Department as his personal law firm. But never mind, we need to clarify that these things should never happen again. And I think this is a moment when we have a Democratic president where we might be able to get some Republicans on board with that agenda. So that's also an early priority for me. Lots of other stuff, but why don't I stop there and we'll take the next question.
Great, thanks, Tom. Your next pre-submitted question: how do we prevent future presidents from abusing their office, and what should happen to Trump after Biden takes over?
Well, that just picks up where I left off. We introduced a bill last September, October. Congressman Adam Schiff was the chief sponsor of it, which dealt with the full range of what I consider to be abuses of presidential power that we have seen under the current administration. Everything from impounding funds approved by Congress for one purpose to fill another purpose. This is what President Trump did when he stole money from the Defense Department to pay for the border wall, for example, to firing actors general at the various executive branch departments for political reasons, political interference with the Department of Justice, abusing emergency powers to do things that have nothing to do with with national emergencies. And as I suggested, I think that there is a reasonable that with Biden in the White House, with a Democratic president in the White House, to be able to convince some of my Republican colleagues that this is something that they should support, because after all, the first president whose powers will be constrained, the first president who will be prevented from ignoring congressional subpoenas. That's another thing put in this bill. Will be Joe Biden. Will be a Democratic president. It should be in their partisan interest to support such a thing at a moment like this. But of course, it will apply to every future president and make it much less likely that we will ever have to deal with this kind of situation that we've experienced in these last 4 years. So I think we should make an effort to work with across party lines on this, and to try to pass something in the House that would stand a shot of going through the Senate, because of it's no longer an anti-Trump bill thing that will protect all of us, no matter who may be president in the future. So I'm looking forward to trying to do. On what should happen to President Trump, that's not for me to say. On January 20th, he will be an ordinary citizen of the United States of America. He can go and live in Mar-a-Lago. He may go live in our congressional district in Bedminster. It's up to him. He will be subject, as he always should, to the rule of law. If there are cases, they will be heard and they will be adjudicated in the courts. I believe that President-elect Biden, appoint an attorney general and U.S. attorneys around the country of unimpeachable integrity and independence, and tell them, enforce the law, and president's not going to interfere, members of Congress are not going to interfere, none of us are going to be saying or should be saying lock him up, lock her up. We should just support the rule of law and let our independent, non-political prosecutors and courts go where facts and the law take them.
Great, thanks, Tom. Let's take one more frequently asked question, and then we will go into our live questioning. Just a reminder, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. If you can message the Rep. Tom Malinowski account directly, that would be preferable. But let's go into one last frequently asked question. Tom, how do we rebuild trust in our democratic institutions moving forward?
So the most important thing we can do actually is what Congress is supposed to do anyway, and that's pass legislation. I think a lot of what we have experienced in the last few years, not just the last 4 years under President Trump, but going back to the rise of the Tea Party in 2009, 2010, a lot of that is rooted in a loss of faith that can actually, for people, government can get things done. And the more people lose faith, the more people think Washington is broken, that the Congress is gridlocked, that the two parties can never find agreement on anything, the more susceptible folks naturally argument that we should just whole damn thing to this and elect people who are not serious, elect people who, like President Trump, who basically say, whatever you may think of me, I'm going to just shake everything up and make it different in some magical way that might produce a different result. And so that cynicism about government, that cynicism and hopelessness in Washington, I think is our number one enemy. It's not a political party or movement or person. That's the enemy. And the best way to address that is to show that we can actually get something useful done. Something, not like renaming a post office, but something important and you. And I'll come back to the hope I expressed a few moments ago that the things we can do is to pass a major infrastructure bill, not just in the House, but signed by President Biden, that puts people back to work, that starts, that gets the government back in the business of building big things that people can see, that people will use, that people will appreciate, and that has this, moves us along the policy objective of transforming our economy so that America can lead the world in building a clean energy future. That, I think, if we can get that, by definition, it would be bipartisan, because you can't get anything through the Senate unless it's bipartisan. Even if, by the way, Democrats win those 2 Georgia Senate seats, the Senate still operates under rules that require some bipartisanship. If we can get that done, that will be a major step in the direction of restoring people's confidence and faith in the institution, and which we can then build on by doing additional things. So that's where I would start. And by the way, I've mentioned infrastructure twice without mentioning gateway, and so scold me for that. Within any major infrastructure bill, I would fight very, very hard, and I think will be successful in to make the next few down payments on the most important infrastructure project that New Jersey needs. I've already been in touch with the Biden transition team about it. He supports the Gateway project. There's enough funding in the pipeline that he could get things rolling just by making some administrative decisions. And so we'll be working with his team to identify those early steps that a friendly administration, friendly to New Jersey, can and I think will take to get this thing moving.
Great. Thanks, Tom. All right. Our first question comes from Ruben. Ruben, can you hear us? Ruben? All right. We'll go on to...
Okay, no, I'm here.
Great.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, just 2 real quick questions, by the way. Tom, you are the first Democrat I ever voted for. I've been voting for 35 years. You're the first one up. So just thought I'd let you know that.
Good to know. Thank you.
Question, 2 questions. One, I don't think this tax reform was a tax cut. I think that it was a reform, but SALT, specifically the SALT limitation, are you guys, when do you see that being rescinded? Because of course that hurts us here in New Jersey. And number 2, wouldn't an easy way to, let me just phrase it the way I'm going to phrase it, to prevent President Trump from running again in 2024 is just pass a law to require candidates to furnish 5 years of tax returns if they want to run for president?
Yeah. So I'll start with that one. That's actually part of HR 1, which we passed in the House in 2019. The bill almost certainly as a whole stands no chance in a McConnell run Senate, because McConnell is dead set, passionately opposed to campaign finance reform of any kind. So that raises the question, should we split HR 1 up, maybe pass the whole thing as a symbolic act, but also take individual pieces like the requirement that candidates for president and vice president furnish their tax returns and see if we can pass those individually. And my answer is yes, I would like to try to do that, because I think that piece, again, especially if Trump is no longer in the White House, might garner a bit more bipartisan support. One way, it's also possible tax returns are going out in other ways through legal cases. But as a matter of principle, Trump or no Trump, it's something that I think we should do and that I will strongly support. And then, sorry, I've forgotten
Salt.
the first part of your question.
Salt.
Oh, salt, of course. So we passed in late 2019 in the House a bill, as you may know, to fully restore the salt deduction. It did not get a hearing in the Senate, and again, this thing that is going to fortunately depend a lot on the outcome of those Georgia elections, because again, I think this is something McConnell feels very strongly about. And a number of members of his caucus feel very strongly about. They didn't just support that bill. They've spent the last 2 years arguing that the SALT deduction was a completely unjust giveaway to, sometimes they say, wealthy states, sometimes they say Democrat states. It featured in the campaign that we just saw. Obviously, Republicans in New Jersey and Democrats all agree on this, but Republicans from most other states have really been anti-SALT messaging in over the last year. So we've laid down a marker in the House that any future tax reform has to address SALT. The Democratic majority has laid down that marker. And it is our hope, it's my hope, that we do have another crack at tax reform, because there are a lot of other stuff, a lot of other things I think we need to do for the benefit of the economy. Stronger provisions, for example, to require corporations that have stashed money overseas to bring it home to the United States, where it can be subject to now a lower corporate tax rate. There are a lot of other things we need to do. We've said SALT's got to be addressed as part of that. But my expectation of success is going to a lot on the outcome of that Georgia, that will determine whether McConnell can can control what gets a vote in the Senate for the next 2 years. I think we'll have a harder time on SALT. We will continue to try, but we'll have a harder time if that's what we're dealing with. So that's my candid assessment of where we are right now.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. And it means a great deal to me to continue to earn your support. So I hope you'll continue to join us on these. And if you have any concerns about anything I'm doing or my Democratic colleagues in the House are doing, please.
Great, thank you both. All right, Tom, your next question comes from Alexis. Alexis, can you hear us? Alexis?
Yes, hi Alexis. I'm good. It's okay, no worries.
Okay. That's all right. We'll move on to another pre-submitted question.
No. We've got Alexis.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I support specific things. I didn't, just so you know, I did not co-sponsor support the specific Green New Deal resolution that was in 2019, because I thought it was a little too vague, and it encompassed things that were not, in my view, directly climate change. But I am very much in favor of a green jobs recovery plan, which is what the infrastructure bill that we passed last year and hope to enact this year really was, in the sense that a lot of the investment in that infrastructure bill was for mass transit. And yes, we're repairing our highways and things that we continue to use, but there was a much bigger emphasis than in past infrastructure bills on mass transit. There was a separate bill passed that focused a lot of resources on the expansion and improvement of our national electric grid that we are going to need as we transition to an economy that is powered by solar and wind and other renewable sources. We can't. It's not enough just to build the windmills and the solar farms. We also need a way to store and transmit that electricity in ways that we do have the capacity to do right now. And we also put a lot of incentives in the bill for electrifying our transportation network, so more electric cars, buses, trucks, et cetera. That's both a way, again, to transition to clean energy, but at the same time building things and thus creating jobs for working Americans at a moment when we desperately, desperately need that to recover from COVID. And I'm sure you've seen that President-elect Biden during the campaign put forward a very ambitious plan that in many ways goes beyond past in the House, but along the same lines that I described. So that's something I very, very strongly support, and that's doable under these circumstances. I'd like to go further in terms of climate legislation. I'm one of the folks who signed up to pricing carbon in a way that reflects the actual costs that are imposed on us and our economy by using carbon-based fuels. You know, a way to incentivize the private sector to do what I think most of our companies want to do anyway, as long as they get the clear market signal. That's, again, embrace that clean energy future. And I hope we have a chance to do that, but that may be a little bit more controversial in a still divided Congress. Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, our next question comes from Jean.
Hold on. Alexis, what was, Nari, I think you weren't hearing Alexis.
Yeah, I'm not hearing her for some reason, but continue on, Alexis.
Oh, okay. You don't be, but that's all right. Thank you. Okay.
All right, are we good now? I think so.
Yes.
Okay, our next question now comes from Jean. Jean, can you hear us? Jean?
Hey, Jean. I can hear you, Jean. Yep, go ahead. Yeah. Well, this is sort of what I was alluding to when I mentioned the legislation that we'd introduced in this session that I think we'll reintroduce and try to get for in the next session on the theory that if the president whose powers are constrained is Joe Biden, we may get more by support for the idea of codifying some of those norms you're talking about. There are a lot of things, like, for example, not politicizing or interfering with the Justice Department, that are not written in law. It's not in the Constitution. There's no statute. When I was, say, at the State Department, under the Obama administration. We just understood that I couldn't pick up the phone and say to a counterpart of mine at the Justice Department, "Hey, there's this really bad guy, and I want you to prosecute him." And if I did, like, my counterpart would have shut me down immediately and said that's totally appropriate. And if I did it a second time, I'd probably be fired. But it's not. And you know, I think what we learned in this that there are some things that need to be written down a little bit more clearly. Not necessarily in a way that, you know, if a president does those things, federal agents will come and take him away to prison, but clear guidance courts that, you know, no, this is a line, you cross a line, you've got to step back. And, you know, say what we will, President Trump, there was not a single case in 4 years in which he defied a court. You know, if somebody challenged him in court and the court struck down an executive order or a rule or decision he made, the Trump administration abided by those decisions. That's another way in which our system held. But we do need much more clear rules to ensure that those lines are understood and can be enforced by the courts. So that's what I hope we'll work on. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And look, again, you mentioned at the end this close election. And I think a lot of folks are sending me the message that, you know, just as you are a check against President Trump, we also want Congress to be a check on President Biden, and do your constitutional duty. Don't just be partisan. Don't just be tribal. And they're right. I happen to like Biden, but it's not going to stop me from my constitutional duty if I think that that lines are crossed by anybody in his administration. I expect you guys to hold me to that as well.
Thank you, Gene. We had some small technical difficulties, so I'll be taking over. We did have some technical difficulties with the questions too. So if we did not respond to you through the chat feature, or we haven't called on your question, please just resubmit your question through the chat feature. Again, include your name, your question, and the town you're from, and we will start making that list again and try to get to those questions. In the meantime, Tom, a question that was submitted beforehand, can you give an update on the vaccine distribution process in New Jersey?
Yes. So, as I'm sure many of you have seen, we now have two very, very, very prime vaccines with Pfizer and Moderna. And come, I mean, we will at the end of this, I think, have multiple vaccines, which is good. But right now, we have some confidence with regard to Pfizer and Moderna. And what I have been told by the governor's office is that in December, we should be able to expect in New Jersey around 270,000 doses of the Pfizer and about 190,000 doses of the Moderna vaccines. Sorry, that's by the end of December, which will enable us to begin in December vaccinating sort of the first highest priority phase of this effort. That will begin with healthcare workers, frontline workers who are most likely to be exposed to the virus so that they can take care of us. And also, you know, folks who are immunocompromised, folks above a certain age. 270 plus 190 is not going to get, it's not enough for, you know, everybody over 65. But I think that process will begin. And then starting in January, the expectation, knock on wood, is that New Jersey will get around 1.1 million doses from Pfizer and Moderna per month. So what that means is, if that holds January, February, we should be able to focus on people in the higher risk categories by virtue of age. And probably by April or so, we should be getting into a much larger population where just about anybody should be able to start getting vaccinated. So that's based on what we know right now, and that could change for the better if we have more vaccines like AstraZeneca or one of these others that is approved. Things could slow down as well because the best laid plans sometimes don't work out. But this is the plan right now, and I think should give us some hope that if we can get through this winter, we will be in a much better position by late spring with a real chance of beginning to resume normal life. What that says to me as a member of Congress is, let's be generous now with another round of relief to get us through that winter, to make sure that our governor and others can take the steps they need to take, and then begin fast recovery with the true stimulus through infrastructure investment and other stuff that I've discussed already, starting in the spring.
Thank you, Tom. Our next live question comes from Patrick. Patrick, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Hey, Patrick.
Hi, Congressman. So before I begin my question, your staff actually helped when I was struggling with unemployment. I read and I saw a tweet that your staff was working overtime to make sure that everyone in the district was taken care of unemployment-wise, and it was taken. I had a 4-month waiting period of nothing, and over the night after I sent a tweet out, I got taken care of, and I saw that your staff stopped their duties in DC and Jersey to take care of that. So seeing that you're taking care of your constituents it's great quality, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad we were able to help.
So my question, the president's executive order for the 1776 commission has me very worried about what the future of, the education of the children in the United States looks like. I know it's an executive order, but what does the future look like for that? And then what are your thoughts on what our next Secretary of Education goal should be?
Thank you. So that executive order, as I understand it, there's so many things going on that just keeping track of stuff to worry about has been one of my biggest challenges. But that executive order, I recall, appeared to be the president's attempt to kind of instill a patriotic education according to his definition of patriotism that I don't think is necessarily where the country should be going. Do believe, I've always felt very strongly, and this is one of my goals for the term, that we need to focus more, invest, prioritize more civics education for our kids. That's one of the lessons of the last few years. Civics, I mean an understanding of American history and American government in an objective way, in a non-political way, not Republican, not Democrat, not demanding that our children believe a certain thing, but giving them the tools to think critically about the choices that they will make as citizens, because that is the most important job they're ever going to have, being citizens of the United States. And I think a lot of politicians the last 2 decades, 3 decades have focused much more on STEM education, computer literacy and math and science. And I get it's hugely important for our economy. I'd like to be the member of Congress who reminds people that civics is just as important as STEM. And so we'll be looking for ways to do that, and hope that the next Secretary of Education will agree. I also think, probably the most one of the most cost-effective investments that the federal government can make in improving education in America is investing in high-quality preschool for all of our kids. As you well know, most education decisions are made locally or at the state level in the United States. But this is something where this is an area the federal government can provide resources to supplement what states can do, and it actually wouldn't be that expensive on top of what states are already doing to make sure that every 4-year-old in this country can attend a high-quality kindergarten. And as we know, you assure that everything from that point in that child's life is going to be better. So that's what I hope to see as a top priority.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Of course.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Tom. Just a reminder, we did have some technical difficulties. I just want to make sure we didn't miss anyone's question. If we haven't called on your question and you submitted one earlier, please just resubmit your question so we can make sure we get to it. In the meantime, our next question comes from Nadine. Nadine, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Nadine.
Hi there. So President-elect Joe Biden has identified climate change as one of the highest priorities of his administration. I want to thank you, Congressman, for your strong support of bipartisan climate legislation. And I know you've talked about this a little bit, but Biden will do what he can by executive order. But Congress passing legislation will have a lot more staying power and can't be reversed as easily as executive orders, as we've seen from one president to another. What do you see Congress being able to do to quickly reduce greenhouse gas and identify and address climate change in a bipartisan way, perhaps something other than the infrastructure bills that you've mentioned already?
Yeah. Wait, can I mention that again?
Of course.
So, as you say, there's a lot that a president can do by executive order rulemaking. Well, one thing that he's already said he's going to do is to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords on day one. I don't think the Paris Climate Accords are adequate. It's not going to save the world all by itself, but it is a reminder that no matter how good a job the United States does in addressing climate change, it can't be done if the world isn't pulling together. And if we aren't able to put pressure on economies, other large countries like China, to do the right thing as well. China's investing a lot of money in clean energy technology because they want to corner the market. They want to be the leader in selling that technology to the world, and I want to beat them there. I want America to be that leader, and I think that's one way we convince people across party lines that we should be forward-looking on climate change. But they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, and even as they invest in clean energy technology, they're putting massive coal-fired power plants into operation and making the problem much, much worse. And so we need not just the Paris Accords, but something bigger, I think, to be able to shame countries like China into the right thing. So that's number one. Then there are all the regulatory steps where he can, over a period of months, roll back some of the steps that the Trump administration took to weaken our clean air, clean water protections, our rules governing auto emissions and other things, relative forward for President Biden to do. And then that gets us back to your question, what Congress do? I've already talked about it, and I keep talking about it because it's important and I think it can be done. And I don't want to I don't want us to just pass legislation in the House that goes nowhere because, we've done that for 2 years. We don't have time to waste. We've got to be able to deliver things that are real. And so infrastructure is something we can deliver, and we can make it climate friendly. So that's number one. And then I mentioned broader climate legislation, including using market mechanisms like pricing carbon. And what's frustrating there for me is that was a Republican idea at the outset. You wind the clock back 10, 15 years, and Democrats would be saying, okay, we got to fight climate change, and the way we do it is through regulation. We've got to, tell corporations, we got to tell power plants they have to emit less energy. We've got to tell the auto company they have to produce cars. And then Republicans were saying, whoa, 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 we don't like all that regulation. What we like is using the market to incentivize corporate America to change. And so actually it was Republicans who put things like cap and trade and taxing carbon. And then the Tea Party wave happened. Folks, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, who used all that stuff. McCain was to the end of his life, but most of the rest of them backed away from it. And now they're not for regulation, but they're also not for these market mechanisms. They're not for anything. And I think the way to change that is trying to encourage the private sector industries that lobby Congress to make this more of a priority. When I talk to companies, when I talk to corporate executives, certainly in New Jersey, almost every single one of them acknowledges that this is the direction we need to move in. I've had meetings with Chamber of Commerce where just to a person around, they say, yeah, we're for carbon pricing. But when they go to lobby Congress, it's not on their top 3 list. The financial industry, the insurance industry has a powerful stake in us doing the right thing on climate, because as storms become more and more and more powerful, as we experience more and more actual harm due to climate change, guess who pays for that? It is the insurance industry. And we need those guys talking to members of Congress who are currently not interested in climate legislation to change the political dynamic that keeps this a partisan issue in Washington. I think we can do that. And so when I think about the politics of this, that's where I'm going to be putting my energies.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you knew this, but the European Union is going to be instituting a border carbon adjustment in a couple of years, which will make trade difficult for American companies if we don't also have a price on carbon.
Well, that's a very interesting and important point. And again, I really think corporate America is largely there. I mean, even ExxonMobil supports a carbon fee. The large energy companies see they have an interest in this, that they're big enough, rich enough that they can evolve to become much more, to become clean energy companies, actually 20, 30, 40 years down the road. But some of my colleagues in the Senate have not gotten the memo yet, and they think that it is their partisan duty to oppose anything that has the word climate change attached to it. I think, again, if they start getting lobbied by the industries that they claim to be friendly to, that may change rather quickly.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nadine.
Thank you both. Tom, your next question. What will you do to try to reach across the aisle in this new administration?
Of course, when I reach out to the administration, that's not reaching across the aisle. But as I suggested and alluded to in response to several questions, there's not a lot that we achieve in Congress without some degree of bipartisanship on the big and important issues. Even if Democrats win those 2 Georgia Senate seats and have a majority in the Senate, would mean you have Democratic Senate committee chairs, and the Democrats control kind of what gets to the floor, what gets to a vote. There's still no way we can pass legislation and overcome filibusters and other procedural tactics that the other side will be able to use if we don't have some bipartisanship. So I really think that it behooves us to begin in the first few months of the year by trying to craft legislation that can get a reasonable number of moderate Republicans on. Again, I keep coming back to infrastructure, to COVID relief. There will be actions that we take on foreign policy and national security issues that I think will garner bipartisan support, and that's where I will expect to be playing a leading role. I think if we start with things like that, another issue on healthcare reform, we're not going to be able to pass, I think, major far-reaching transformation of our healthcare system with Republican support, but I think we can do things like addressing the problem of surprise medical billing, where there have been Republicans working with Democrats for some time to craft a solution. I think if we focus on those things first, not only will we be able to get some things done that help people, that start making a difference in people's lives, but we will also be able to push back against some of the cynicism about government in Washington that we've also talked about on this call, to prove to Americans who have lost some faith in their institutions that we can actually get some things done. And if we can do that, we can build on that to do more. So I'm prepared to do that. I am, particularly with a very small majority the Democrats have in the House, I think that's got to be our emphasis over the next few months. But Republicans have to do their part. I've seen some stirrings in the Senate suggesting that these guys may oppose virtually every person that Biden is nominating for cabinet level positions. I can tell you the folks he's nominated so far, particularly for the national security related agencies, including a very good friend of mine, Tony Blinken, who I hope will be Secretary of State. These are totally moderate, professional, patriotic picks. These are folks who have worked well with Republicans in the past. If I'm Marco Rubio, if I'm Lindsey Graham, and I'm sincere in my convictions, these are the people I would want to see a Democratic president appoint. So we'll see if they start voting against everybody because that's just the tribal thing to do, or if they say Joe Biden can't appoint any judges, no matter how moderate they may be, we're just going to vote against all of his judges and keep those judge slots open for the next Republican president. That's hard. There has to be some recognition on the Republican side as well that Joe Biden won. He got more votes than anybody in American history. Democrats kept the House. We're evenly divided in the Senate. And just as we have to work with them, they got to work with us.
Thank you, Tom. Your next question. How can we bring change to police departments without saying the words defund the police?
Well, I question kind of itself. I think we work on changes broadly supported by not just community leaders and activists, but a lot of reform-minded folks in law enforcement. And don't say defund the police because that's what we're doing. Don't use a slogan and actually accurately describe the reforms that have been proposed and that is perfectly designed to trigger opposition among our fellow Americans who were very concerned and upset about what happened to George Floyd and recognized that there are changes that need to happen, but who also much strongly support their local police departments and who believe that law enforcement is absolutely a critical American life. Be done unless the activists and folks who support law enforcement but recognize the need for reform are in the same room and same language. So I feel very strongly about that. We put forward some very good proposals in the last Congress, some of which I think could continue to get bipartisan support. But all of this has to be framed as a way to strengthen law enforcement in America, to strengthen confidence and trust between law enforcement and the communities that it protects, to ensure that everybody in our country, regardless of who we are, regardless of our race, can have equal confidence that law enforcement is there to protect them. That is the way, I think, to frame the issue that can broadest possible political support for the change that I strongly believe needed.
Thank you, Tom. For everyone on the call, this will be our last call for questions. If you do have a question at this point, please submit it through the chat feature. At this time, again, please include your name, your question, and the town you're from. Tom, in the question or the chat feature, someone brought up concerns about another government shutdown. Is there a chance for another fiscal government shutdown, and is there a way to prevent it for this year?
Well, there's always a chance, right? If we don't agree on something, then happen. I think there's no appetite for it in the United States Congress among Democrats or Republicans. We have a very record, including through the Trump administration, of coming up with that are need to pass appropriations bills and to fund the government. What happened at the end of early 2019 was the Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate did actually on a budget, and then President Trump jumped in and said, well, you know, I'm just not going to sign this because you're not giving me money for the wall. And he hadn't even asked for money for the wall before he had started the process. That's where that government shut down. I don't see, you know, theoretically it's possible. We will do everything we can to avoid it. I don't think it's going to happen. We basically have the next, between now and the holidays to ensure that it doesn't happen. And already quite a bit of progress has been made by the negotiators. So I'm more confident about getting done. Where I'm a little bit more mystic and very sad, as I mentioned at the outset, is when it comes to the prospect of additional COVID yes, in whatever we pass to keep the government open, at the very least to extend eligibility for the existing programs that Congress created last year. And that's what I'll be fighting for in that sense.
Thank you, Tom. That's all of our questions that we have at this moment, Tom. I just want to thank everyone on the call for joining us today and being patient with us through our minor technical difficulties and joining us again. It's great to see everyone. And I'll turn it back over to you, Tom, for closing remarks.
DeAndre and Narit, and thank you to everyone who joined this call. I'm so happy I've got the chance to continue to have these conversations with you. I hope you'll continue to join. Please recruit friends and neighbors. If there's anybody who you know who, whether they voted for me or not, has an interest in how they are represented, and especially if they didn't, especially if they have concerns that might have led them to make a different choice, please let them know. I absolutely want every possible opportunity to hear from them, to answer their concerns. And until we can go live again, this is the best way to do it. So we'll keep on having these sessions and obviously communicate with you as to when we do, and I would be incredibly grateful if you continue to help spread the word for us. Thank you again for really interesting set of questions and for the thoughts you expressed about what we should be doing. That's where I get my priorities and will continue to. And until then, till the next time, everybody please stay safe and healthy and always let us know how we can help. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tom. Well done.